You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
Or sometimes it's the other way around, at least in comic books. Basil Karlo, aka Clayface, made his first debut back in 1940 in Detective Comics numero 40. He was an actor that had gone a touch crazy when a remake of his classic movie was released with a new actor, kind of like that RoboCop remake that 7 people saw. So he decided to adopt the persona of an old villain he played called Clayface. This guy's pretty neat. I mean, he can mimic anybody just by getting a smidge of DNA. So if you sneeze around him, he can be like, and then turn into you. He's wild, he's sick. He can change the shape and size of his body. Solid actor, so method. Cut to Detective Comics Volume 1, issue 934. Clayface had escaped Arkham Asylum to go and see himself on the big screen. So as the crowd of moviegoers sprint out to avoid this monster mash, Clayface is left sitting there wide-eyed, wondering what could have been. So Batman and Batgirl enter the theater, shocked that this is the reason why he escaped Arkham Asylum. All he wants in this moment is to watch the 84-minute movie and feel like him again. Batman responds with, well, what if I could give you more than that, Basil? What's the catch, he answers? Well, the catch is, says Batgirl, you're gonna have to do everything we say. And poof, we have Clayface on the home team.
Coming in at number 9, we have Magneto. The master of magnetism is one of the best villains ever made. He has been going toe-to-toe with the X-Men since they first got started, and the entire time he has wanted the X-Men, the human race, and his brother Charles to submit to his will and see him and mutants as the rightful masters of planet Earth. I mean, we could go on for hours to break down all the terrible things that he's done. I mean, he is the leader of a group called the Brotherhood of Evil. It doesn't sound like they were into planting trees and creating clean energy. But Magneto's hate towards humans was justified since he saw humans take his family members to Auschwitz during World War II. But eventually, Magneto started to despise humans a little less and warmed up to Charles and the idea that humans and mutants could coexist on the same planet. There was even a time when Charles put Magneto in charge of his famous School of the Gifted. That should have been a shock to so many members of the X-Men, but eventually people started to understand Magneto's approach to running the X-Men, even if it was a little more heavy-handed.
And number 8, Black Widow. Of course, she started out evil. Her name is Black Widow. She's literally named after the spider that eats her mate's head while they get it on. So this dark journey began back in Tales of Suspense issue 52. Right on the front cover, loud and clear, says, introducing the gorgeous new menace, the Black Widow. This was in 1964, and it wasn't until 2 years later, in 68, where she dropped the villain act. Yeah, so for 2 years, she served as an antagonist to Iron Man, after the Soviet Union sent her to America to take down Stark Industries. So fans actually thought this was gonna happen in Iron Man 2. When she showed up to work for Stark, everyone's like, ooh, she bad. And then she saves Tony's neck. Literally, she zaps him at the donut shop when she makes her alternate persona reveal. And then she finally takes the leap of faith, literally, becoming one of the most valuable Avengers and being a key asset into saving the universe from Thanos snapping in Endgame. And I still remember when I saw it for the first time, I heard like 40 kids crying at the premiere. I remember because I was one of them.
Coming in at number 7, we have Venom, the strange goop from outer space that looked for the strongest guy in town for his host. That's when we got the amazing black suit Spider-Man that doesn't even need web blasters. Say what? But then Venom gets a little too handsy and starts to get into Peter's psyche. After that, Peter kicks him off and the symbiote finds Eddie Brock. So the symbiote was pissed that Spider-Man kicked him out, and Eddie Brock hated Peter Parker, so the two of them were a match made in heaven and went out of their way to try and kill the web slinger. Venom is more of a tale of a scorned lover than anything else. Eventually, Venom works his way onto Flash Thompson after he loses his legs at war. Thompson uses the symbiote for only 48 hours at a time, and it allows him to become a super soldier who fights for good. And then we got introduced to Venom's homeworld, where we find out that symbiotes head out to other planets to find great heroes and bind with them. When Spider-Man rejected the symbiote, this caused it to go a little crazy and always wanted to get him back. So really, Venom is just the story of a really bad breakup.
And number 6, Red Hood. Jason Todd started out as a hero. He was the second Robin in line, actually, until he was done dirty. Yeah, the Joker straight up beats him to death. So then he decided the dark side was the way to go. And we see this come full circle in Under the Red Hood. But he's still got some heart left in that broken soul. I mean, he relentlessly beats criminals to a bloody pulp, but he doesn't hurt innocent civilians. And honestly, I feel like Batman is too easy on some of these fools. I mean, of course, the reason Jason Todd becomes this dark, leather-wearing jacket arm breaker is because Batman didn't avenge his death. Red Hood finds a line in between both of those worlds, and due to his own troubled upbringing, he actually cares for the well-being of children. He likes kids, how nice. So recently he's worked alongside fellow anti-heroes like Arsenal and Starfire.
Coming at number 5, we have Doc Ock. Is this guy the best Spider-Man villain of all time? Well, that's up for debate, but he's definitely up there. The guy has been bad to the bone ever since he was created, and even did some super slimy stuff like marrying Aunt May. But all that would change when he went out of his way to change bodies with Peter Parker. See, Doc Ock was about to die, but he wasn't going down without a fight, so he switched bodies with Peter Parker to have his young, fresh spider body. And guess what? Peter ended up dying in the old, crummy Doc Ock body, but not before he transferred all of his thoughts, emotions, and morality into Doc Ock, who was now in his body. So now Doc felt what it meant to be a hero, but was still himself, but in Spider-Man's body. A little confusing, but I trust that you guys are following me. Well, because of this, the new version of Doc decided that he would be a hero, but he still hated Spider-Man. So he decided that he would be a better hero than Spidey had ever been before to show him up, and that's when we get the superior Spider-Man run of comics.
And number 4, another Doctor, this time Dr. Doom. Making his first appearance in Fantastic Four issue 5, Victor Von Doom likes to go head to head with the Fantastic Four. He's one of the most popular Marvel villains ever. I mean, he's so smart, this guy's a straight up genius. He's the ruler of the land Latveria, and things take a turn for the better after Tony's death in Civil War II. So the infamous Iron Man series by Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleeves has one of the most popular front cover illustrations ever. He was a hero for a while, and it all started when Doom was running the show in the multiverse in Secret Wars. His face healed, and that was the start of his good tendencies. He's like, wait, Face ID actually works? This is so much easier. I don't have to take off my metal gauntlets every time I want to send a tweet. Sick. I'm gonna go save Maria Hill from Diablo. BRB.
Coming in number 3, we have Loki. Such a great character. I mean, the guy is the god of mischief, and who doesn't love a good prank? We all know Loki has been a hardcore villain for a long time, always fighting with his more muscly, more handsome, more bearded brother Thor. I get where some of this dude's envy comes from. But when we step into the MCU, we originally see him show his face as a villain. He's the first big baddie that the Avengers have to take down, and do they ever stop him from destroying Earth? I mean, there was billions of dollars in damages, but that's the way the news goes.
And that's the way the news goes.
But as his character grows through 3 Thor movies, and then his short appearance in Infinity War, we start to see someone who understands family comes first, and we actually see Thor and Loki start to fight side by side. In Thor Ragnarok, we even see Loki be a key part in the plan that unfolds perfectly to take down Hela and save Asgard, even though Asgard got destroyed. You guys know what I'm talking about. And on top of it, Loki sacrifices himself to save Thor and the entire universe. Well, he tries to save the entire universe. Imagine if that dagger actually went to Thanos' throat, there would have been no movie. There would have been no movie at all, and Loki would have been the biggest hero in the universe.
And number 2, Harley Quinn. They became the king and queen of Gotham City, and God help anyone who disrespected his queen. She was crazier than him and more fearless, making her first debut back in Batman Harley Quinn in 1999 and portrayed by the insanely talented Margot Robbie.
Who? What are you, now?
Harley Quinn has always been known for flipping back and forth, changing sides. Now in the comics, her relationship with the Joker is abusive, it's controlling, and Harley has histrionic personality disorder, so she has a lot of things in common with the Joker when it comes to the evil brainwaves. She's smart, she uses her psychiatrist skills to get in close, you know, get in his head. Team player, I see it. See what makes that Jared Leto brain act in such a weird way. She's super lovable, and if you want to see Harley in full-on hero mode, you gotta check out Brian Azzarello's one-shot from earlier this year titled Birds of Prey.
Coming in the number 1 spot, we have Galactus, one of the biggest baddies that has ever been in Marvel, both in size and threat. This dude is known as the Destroyer of Worlds. He eats planet after planet, just sucking them down like a cold brew on a Friday night.
Oh my god. That is better than sex.
Even though it seems that this massive evildoer can never change sides to the side of good because he literally needs to eat planets to survive, Marvel Comics managed to find a way to make our once evil Galactus into one of the most powerful forces for good in the entire universe. It was the help of the Ultimates, which was a grouping of some of the greatest heroes ever. They used the original pod that Galactus was created in, which they put him back into, and they used ISO 8, which was a substance that had reality shifting abilities. With this, they were able to make Galactus into a force of good that instead of sucking life from planets, he would restore dead planets full of life. Quite the redemption story. Well,
At number 10, I'm putting Hawkeye. Introduced first as a circus performer, Hawkeye starts his career as not much of a hero at all, but a villain. When he first decides to put on the suit and start going by the Hawkeye moniker, he teams up with Black Widow and takes on numerous heroes as a bad guy. After he and Black Widow fall in love, they become committed to this lifestyle for 2 whole years. But after his time as a crook, Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, decides it's time for him to change things up. Basically, he just realizes that the supervillain lifestyle isn't for him and approaches the Avengers with the proposition that he joins them. Pretty bold. But they actually accept his offer and he seamlessly joins the team and fights evil for the rest of his career. It's a pretty quick and easy transition to the good side, and it proves that it's not always some big event or reckoning that can change someone's moral alignment. Sometimes you just gotta go with your gut. At number 9 is the Riddler. This is a pretty goofy one because the Riddler makes this shift to the good side due to a bonk on the head by Shining Knight, which I think is a very funny way to turn to the good side. Not only does he decide he's finished with a life of crime, but he also loses his interest in riddles entirely. And with his memory of all his past deeds wiped, he's able to start completely anew as a detective on the streets of Gotham. With a bit of an infamous celebrity status, as you could expect, Detective Riddler has a decent career as a detective and is even hired by Batman and Nightwing twice along the way. A Riddler with no interest in riddlers or doing harm, I suppose, just leaves a pretty smart dude who can get stuff done. He still wears all green though, which probably isn't great for blending in. At number 8 is Sandman. Yes, believe it or not, Sandman has actually been part of the Avengers before. One night, the Thing from the Fantastic Four actually sits Sandman down at a bar and tries to talk him out of his life of crime over a beer, and it works. After this, Sandman joins up with the Outlaws, which is a team of villains that are searching for a different path in life, which I imagine is like the AA for supervillains. And after actually helping Spider-Man on a handful of missions, Sandman actually receives a presidential pardon and is offered a spot with the Avengers. But unfortunately, with a little bit of lazy writing, Wizard later uses his magic to brainwash Sandman and turn him back to his evil roots. Reverted back to his previous state, Sandman brings the Sinister Six back together and tries to take down Spider-Man again. But for that short time, it was a great storyline of redemption for a character that really felt like he deserved a second chance. Alright, at number 7, we've got Rogue. This is a pretty cool one. Originally brought on by Mystique to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, Rogue is only a teen when she chooses the path of evil. But the way she gets out of her dark ways is pretty unique and makes a lot of sense, all things considered. During a battle with the Avengers, Rogue absorbs the powers of Carol Danvers, or Miss Marvel at the time. But instead of losing these borrowed powers after a while, which is normally how Rogue's abilities work, Carol Danvers' powers and even her memories stick around. With this hero's thoughts in her head, she goes to Professor X to try to clear them out using his help, and this visit is when she becomes friendly with Charles Xavier, eventually joining the X-Men. At number 6, we have Harley Quinn. First appearing in the Batman the Animated Series, she has only grown in popularity over the years as one of DC's most popular villains. And considering she started as a partner to Joker, it's big news that in her current lore she's known to have flipped over to the good side. Her and the Suicide Squad have even teamed up to defeat the Joker, which is a major moment for the character who has otherwise been seemingly under the control of Joker for most of her villainous career. And what's more, Harley now works as a psychiatrist outside of fighting crime, with intentions of helping people on and off the job as a superhero. At number 5, we've got MODOK Superior. This dude is a bit of a weirdo, and probably one of the last villains you'd expect would go to the good side. Mainly just because he looks so inherently evil. I mean, no offense. Maybe it's the robotic spider legs or even the shit-eating grin he's always got on. Okay, I guess that's just straight up offensive, but lo and behold, it is true. MODOK stands for Mechanized Organism Designed Only for Killing, which is hilarious and initially strikes me as an inherently evil name, but I guess killing could also be done on the bad guys, right? Well, apparently so, because during the Secret Avengers storyline, MODOK Superior, a clone of the original, actually joins the Avengers. I guess the bar is pretty low for entry. Sorry, that was another mean jab at MODOK. I didn't mean it. Turns out he only really joins the team because he has a crush on Maria Hill, one of the operatives in S.H.I.E.L.D. So, a turn to the good side for love. That's special. Good luck, buddy. We're rooting for you. At number 4, we have Magneto. Now, Magneto does good a few different times for various reasons, and sure, he always goes back to his anti-hero status, but these changes to the good side are substantial enough that it puts him on the front end of this list. One instance of Magneto blatantly coming to the good side is when his old friend Charles Xavier dies, and his dying wish is for Magneto to take over the school for gifted youngsters, and Magneto does it for his old friend. Another notable one is the time in X-Men Legacy issue number 237 when Sentinels are infiltrating an asteroid where Magneto is protecting the remaining mutants. And with the mutants on the brink of extinction, Magneto pulls out all the stops, bringing himself to a point of near death where he triumphantly stops the Sentinels in their tracks before finishing off the mutant race. It's not that surprising that Magneto risks it all for mutants. I mean, he's always been on their side, just with a little more resentment in his heart and questionable methods. And some even say that Magneto has always been a good guy. And I'd probably agree with that, but in some instances, it's more obvious than others. At number 3 is Deadpool. Did you know that when Deadpool made his first appearance, he was actually depicted as a villain to the X-Men in the New Mutants? He faces off against heroes like Cable and Domino, and he's only sort of himself in these early iterations. He still drops witty quips, but definitely comes off more serious and reserved than how we know him today. He also appears in issue 2 of X-Force, still as a villain, and in this instance we actually see Weapon X, or Kane, visiting Deadpool in his home country of Canada. But it's not a nice visit, of course. Deadpool is still very much a threat to the good guys at this point, and only later do the writers start to explore Deadpool further and decide that he deserves his own complex backstory and ambiguous moral compass. Thank goodness they saw his potential as an influential hero, because all the box office dollars he's turned in proves that we all do too. Okay, at number 2 we have Venom. This popular symbiote has clearly done a fair amount of time as the evil counterpart to Spider-Man, and there's no doubt that he was written originally as a bad guy. Eddie Brock and Venom have had many different run-ins with Spider-Man over the years, being labeled usually as Spidey's arch nemesis. But what's interesting about Venom, in the case of his good or evil affiliations, is that it's unclear whether or not the symbiote is inherently evil on its own, or if it's influenced by its host. Because in both cases, Venom has bonded with individuals who have been hurt by parents, or are, in the case of Brock, deeply resentful and jealous. Regardless, there have been numerous storylines, primarily starting in 1993, where Venom and Spider-Man basically have a total truce and even work together on numerous occasions. These days, it's not unheard of to see Venom going out of his way to protect innocent civilians in the line of duty. Finally, at number 1 is Punisher. I put Punisher up at number 1 because he's got to be one of the most badass superheroes of all time, and the fact that he chooses to do good is a really cool character trait, considering his look and how he carries himself. It sort of proves that the good side can even be enticing for someone as naturally dark and troubled as Frank Castle. First appearing as a villain, the Punisher is vying to seek revenge on Spider-Man, who he believes killed Norman Osborn. But after his first appearance as a villain, Castle makes it his duty to take on crime as a vigilante. He just does things his own way, through torture, extortion, and kidnapping, among other means. He just doesn't care how he gets his work done, but hey, he's still technically on the good side, regardless of how he does things.
Number 10, the Sandman. William Baker was raised in less than ideal circumstances, with a father who abandoned him as a baby and a mother who coped with this by drinking too much. He grew up to be a bully, calling himself Flint and picking on those weaker and smaller than him. After being expelled from high school for throwing a football game, Flint turned to crime to support himself. He was eventually arrested, but broke out of prison and was exposed to radiation that gave him the power to turn his body into sand that he could reshape into whatever shape he liked. He used these powers to fight heroes such as Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four for years, but eventually expressed a desire to go straight. He developed a friendship with the Thing and even rescued his old nemesis Spider-Man from the evil enforcers. He would go on to join Silver Sable's Wild Pack and was eventually allowed to join the Avengers, showing that he really did have it in him to be a hero. Unfortunately, a villain known as the Wizard created a machine that undid all of Flint's hard work and returned him to his evil nature. Number 9. Gentleman Ghost. Jim Craddock was the son of an English gentleman who abandoned his family, forcing them into poverty. Jim turned to crime, becoming a highwayman before moving to America in hopes of making his fortune. He came across a fortune teller who told him that he would be murdered and become a ghost who would never be able to rest until he had killed the people responsible for his death. This prophecy proved true when the gunslingers Nighthawk and Cinnamon killed him for a crime he did not commit. He became the Gentleman Ghost and developed the powers of invisibility, teleportation, and intangibility, as well as the ability to control his victims' minds. He set about killing his murderers, but unfortunately for him, the gunslingers were reincarnated as Hawkman and Hawkgirl, making him unable to rest, as every time they die, they are reborn. Jim is understandably upset at being killed for no reason and not being able to move on to the afterlife, but if he could put this past him, he could make much better use of his time. Robbing museums and banks is fun, but will probably get old after a couple centuries. Instead, he could use these powers to stop most other supervillains with minimal effort with his mind control. He could do things that the other heroes could never dream of for the simple reason that he is already dead. He is unlikely to reform anytime soon, but it's an interesting possibility to contemplate. Number 8. The Vulture. Adrian Toomes was a simple electrical engineer and inventor who developed a harness that allowed the wearer to fly. He discovered that his business partner was embezzling money from their company, but was ousted by his partner who sold the company. Not wanting to be left with nothing, Toomes used his harness to create the Vulture suit and wings and stole his share of the money from his former partner. Unfortunately, he enjoyed the rush of this and then decided to keep robbing people, going on crime sprees and leaving taunting notes to the authorities. He soon came into conflict with Spider-Man, who defeated him, causing the Vulture to vow revenge. Vulture has been one of Spidey's most consistent foes, but the fact that his career in crime was started due to circumstance and thrill-seeking makes me wonder what would have happened if his business partner hadn't betrayed him. Toomes would probably have just been a wealthy and successful inventor, but if he really wanted a thrill, he could probably achieve that by fighting crime. The suit allows him to fly and heightens his strength. He basically has a very similar power set to Falcon, who does very well with what he's got. Adding to that his genius intellect, it isn't hard to imagine a world in the multiverse where Vulture works to make the world a better place. Number 7. Weather Wizard. Mark Marden was a small-time crook who escaped from prison and got lucky when he went to hide out at his brother's home. His brother was a scientist who was working on weather-controlling technology, and Mark used this tech to create his signature weapon, the Weather Wand. Weather Wizard uses this to unleash blizzards, tornadoes, and lightning storms upon his enemy, the Flash. In one of his first schemes, Weather Wizard tried to take over the country by building weather control stations and then holding various towns hostage unless his demands were met. Putting aside the fact that all of the abilities of the Weather Wand could be used to fight crime just as easily as it can be used to commit them, in a world where severe droughts threaten to destroy crops and hurricanes ravage coastal cities, the ability to change the weather could be used to save millions of lives. This is probably more in line with what Weather Wizard's brother had in mind when he created the initial tech, but Mark's inability to see the potential of the tech he's using is truly baffling. Number 6. Magneto. When Max Eisenhardt was a young man in Germany, he was subjected to many atrocities at the hands of the Third Reich, who sent him to Auschwitz for no other reason than being Jewish. He eventually escaped and became known as Erich Lenscher. He discovered that he had the ability to control the powers of magnetism, and after the war, used them to track down former German soldiers. He developed the belief that mutants and humanity could not coexist and became Magneto, a mutant dedicated to mutant superiority and the leader of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He fought the X-Men several times over the years, but they eventually came to an uneasy truce, working together to form a refuge for their kind on the island of Krakoa. Considering that his intentions are relatively noble, and he has managed to do a lot of good despite his brutal nature, it is a real shame that the trauma of his younger years shaped him into someone with such a negative view of the world. As if he didn't have that baggage, who knows what he and Professor X could have achieved together for their people and humanity. Number 5. Two-Face. Harvey Dent was one of Batman's staunchest allies, working with him as Gotham's district attorney in their effort to root out the crime and corruption that had plagued the city. This all changed when Dent was talking to the crime boss Salvatore Maroni in court. Maroni had smuggled in a vial of highly corrosive acid and threw it in Harvey's face, disfiguring half of his face and turning the heroic district attorney into the villain Two-Face. Two-Face is obsessed with duality and flips a coin to determine whether or not he will kill his enemies. Two-Face is one of Batman's worst enemies, but when the villain Hush gave him plastic surgery, he switched back to the side of law and order and betrayed Hush, helping Batman and Jim Gordon defeat the villain. Batman's friend was back. He trained Harvey to become a vigilante and left him in charge of protecting Gotham while he was away during the Lost Year arc. Unfortunately, when Batman returned, he came across a series of killings that were designed to make it appear that Harvey had returned to villainy. Batman confronted Harvey, who was so angered at Batman's distrust that his Two-Face persona re-emerged and convinced Dent to re-scar his face and return to a life of crime. Number 4. Hunter Zolomon, the Reverse Flash. When Barry Allen was seemingly killed, Wally West became the new Scarlet Speedster. One of his most important allies was an FBI profiler named Hunter Zolomon. Hunter helped Flash understand his enemies and predict their actions so that Flash would be able to capture them easier. After being left in a wheelchair by Gorilla Grodd, Hunter begged Wally to use the cosmic treadmill to go back in time to prevent his injury. Knowing the horrible unintended consequences time travel can have, Wally refused. Zolomon tried to use the treadmill himself, but the resulting explosion gave him the ability to slow down time, giving himself the appearance of super speed. Deciding that Wally could never live up to the legacy of Barry Allen, Zolomon became Wally's Reverse Flash and set about trying to ruin Wally's life, thinking that the tragedy would make him into a better hero. He caused Wally's wife to have a miscarriage and tried to kill Captain Cold because he felt that the villain was wasting Flash's time. The Reverse Flash is a villain because he cares. He genuinely believes that he is making the world a better place by forcing character development onto Wally. With enough therapy, maybe Flash could convince him that he would be serving him better as an ally than as a villain and could reverse his evil ways. Number 3. Nuke. Frank Simpson was an ordinary soldier in the Vietnam War who underwent experimentation by the government in a rather clumsy attempt to recreate the super soldier program that gave birth to Captain America. He has cybernetic enhancements and takes different colored red, white, and blue pills to cause his body to produce additional adrenaline to make him even more dangerous. Nuke thinks he's still in the Vietnam War, and the US tends to just go with his delusions and drop him off wherever they need a lot of people killed in Black Ops operations. Nuke is vicious and dangerous, but most of this is the result of the trauma he suffered in the war. He has shown that he wants to serve his country and keep it safe, but rather than getting him the help he needs and showing him that he no longer needs to go on killing sprees to be a hero, the government indulges his psychosis in order to further their own agenda. In Daredevil Born Again, this came to a tragic end when he was set loose in Hell's Kitchen in an attempt by the Kingpin to drive Daredevil out of hiding. Captain America learned about Nuke and tried to subdue him after he had escaped from custody, but in order to cover their tracks, the US military had Nuke killed before Cap could try and help him. Number 2. The Joker. Batman's arch-enemy the Joker has caused far too much pain and suffering to ever really be redeemed. He paralyzed Barbara Gordon, he killed Jason Todd, he murdered Jim Gordon's wife as well as countless others in his insane obsession with the Batman. However, one version of the character actually did try to redeem himself. In the White Knight universe, the Joker actually became sane and decided to try and save the city, not as a vigilante, but as a politician. Once released from Arkham, Jack Napier sued the GCPD for police brutality and declared war on Gotham's 1%, who were taking advantage of Gotham's crime in order to line their own pockets. He ran for city council and led peaceful protest marches while submitting the other supervillains to mind control in order to further his goals. Although he can never really make up for the harm he has caused, this version of the Joker shows that when properly channeled, his genius intellect can be used to make Gotham a better place. Number 1. Dr. Doom. Longtime rival of the Fantastic Four, Victor Von Doom is the definition of a multi-potentialite. He is the supreme leader of his home country of Latveria, he is an extremely powerful sorcerer, and he is a genius scientist and inventor. His goal is to conquer the Earth so that he can bring order to humanity humanity, and he is willing to go to truly brutal lengths to achieve it. Honestly, this slot could have been filled by several evil scientist characters such as Norman Osborn, the Leader, or Dr. Sivana, because any of them could use their impressive minds to cure diseases or save the Earth from criminals. But Doctor Doom takes this spot because of his nearly unlimited potential to make the Earth a better place. It's a shame that his massive ego and warped sense of right and wrong has led him to believe that the best way to do this is through conquest, as his abilities as a scientist, sorcerer, and inventor could be even more effective at saving the world than those of his ultimate rival, Reed Richards. Number 10. Shocker. Herman Schultz often comes across more as a villain by circumstance rather than someone intent on doing harm. When he was a child, his parents died, leaving him to fend for himself, and like many economically disadvantaged youths are sometimes forced to do, he turned to crime to support himself. He wasn't a particularly skilled criminal until he used materials in the prison workshop to create his VibroShock gauntlets, which allow him to open safes as well as shoot concentrated blasts of air that can be used to destroy walls or deal forceful blows from a distance. Although other villains seem to relish in being criminals, with Shocker it usually feels more like he's gonna turn to the reader and say, well, it's a living! He has done some bad things, but he has been shown to have a sense of honor as well, such as in Guardians of the Galaxy number 29, when he and some of his fellow supervillains raided Avengers Mansion and were forced to team up with the Guardians to defeat a group of aliens that showed up and attacked both groups. When the fight was over, Doc Ock tried to convince the villains to turn on the Guardians, but Shocker and the other villains refused, not wanting to hurt the heroes after they had saved their lives. He has had multiple opportunities to kill Spider-Man, but has chosen not to, such as in Spider-Man number 83, when he opened a window and came face to face with an incapacitated Spider-Man. He basically said, nah, too easy, and left. It makes one wonder what kind of a person he'd be if he'd been afforded the same opportunities as some of the superheroes when he was younger. He could probably do quite a bit of good with his gauntlets, and frankly would probably get more respect as a C-list hero rather than a C-list villain. Number 9. Mr. Freeze. There is perhaps no more sympathetic Batman villain than Mr. Freeze. Although he has had several origins over the years, the most iconic one is that Dr. Victor Freeze was a simple scientist trying to find a cure for his wife Nora's deadly disease. In a tragic accident, Victor became incapable of surviving at temperatures above sub-zero and was forced to create a cryosuit in order to survive. He has developed a freeze gun capable of encasing his victims in ice and turned to a life of crime in order to fund his research and try and save his wife. Considering that the only reason he is working as a criminal is to save the people he loves, and how many times across different media he has been shown working with Batman rather than against him, one can't help but wonder what would happen if he decided to protect Gotham rather than terrorize it. Imagine how easy it would be for Mr. Freeze to stop most villains by simply freezing their feet to the ground and waiting for the police. Heck, if he sold his freezing technology to climate scientists, he could refreeze the polar ice caps, become the savior of mankind, and earn enough money to fund his research and save Nora. Number 8. Spot. It's amazing how similar the origins of a hero and a villain can be. Listen to this one. A brilliant scientist begins experimenting with dangerous radiation, and during a test gone wrong, is granted strange powers that will change their life forever. In Jonathan Owen's case, rather than working with gamma radiation, he was trying to reproduce the powers of the vigilante the Cloak, and opened a portal that transported him to a dimension of half light and half dark. He escaped, but was changed, covered with black spots which acted as portable space warps, allowing him to teleport himself or anyone or anything he wants. A common way he uses this power is to redirect a hero's blows, tricking them into punching themselves in the face. Spot's initial experiment was funded by the Kingpin, so when he emerged for the first time, he fought Spider-Man and Black Cat in order to protect his employer. But what if his experiment was being funded by someone a little less villainous, like say Tony Stark? Would he still have become a villain? Personally, I think his portal powers would be more useful on the good guy's side rather than the villain's. Sure, he can use a portal to rob a bank, but imagine being able to rescue people from a burning building with ease. Frankly, not many people think of Spot as a very effective villain, so why not use those abilities for something that would actually benefit humanity? You know, like scientists are supposed to do? Number 7. Mysterio. Quentin Beck started out as a gifted stuntman and special effects artist, but grew disillusioned with his career due to the lack of recognition his field received. Man, so far this origin story is aging really well. He decided to turn to a life of crime, allying himself with the Tinkerer and disguising himself as an alien in order to steal secrets from high-profile targets and sell them to the highest bidder. When his plan was foiled by Spider-Man, Quentin vowed revenge. He returned sometime later, posing as a superhero named Mysterio, and began framing Spider-Man for crimes in order to get his revenge. The Master of Illusion has tangled with the webbed wall crawler several times over the years, but frankly, if he wasn't so obsessed with getting revenge on Spidey, he probably could have just become an actual superhero. Now, I'm not saying he would be able to join the Avengers, but considering that his main motivator is recognition, and most of his schemes have just been convoluted scams that have ended with him being humiliated, he would have been more likely to achieve his dreams if he had put half as much effort into actually being a hero, rather than trying to fake being a hero while also framing Spider-Man. Number 6. The Riddler. When Edward Nygma was a child, he quickly showed that he had a gifted and powerful mind. His father was unable to come to terms with his son's brilliance and would abuse Edward, claiming that Edward's academic achievements were a result of him cheating. This caused Edward to develop a compulsive need to prove his intelligence, which resulted in him becoming the Riddler, a supervillain with the uncontrollable urge to leave riddles at the scene of his crimes. This tendency to leave clues usually led to him getting caught by Batman. He eventually overcame this compulsion and reformed, becoming an accomplished private detective in Gotham. He still has a massive ego, but he has helped Batman solve several murders over the years, and has even saved a few lives, including the intended victim of a copycat villain named Conundrum, and Dick Grayson. Considering how much he has accomplished as a good guy, it makes one wonder what he could have been capable of if he had been raised in a more nurturing environment and had put his genius mind towards good sooner in his life. Unfortunately, all of this character development was undone in the New 52 reboot of the DC Universe, and he is once again an unrepentant supervillain. Number 5. Poison Ivy. Although in her pre-crisis iteration, Poison Ivy used her plant powers for the singular purpose of accumulating personal wealth, her post-crisis version is a bit more interesting and is the version that we're talking about today. When Pamela Isley was experimented on by the mad doctor Jason Woodrow, she developed her ability to control plants, as well as her ability to seduce and control people with the use of pheromones and kill them with a poison kiss. She commits crimes in order to further her goal of making the world safer for her beloved plants. Now, this may sound noble at first, but you have to keep in mind she wants to accomplish this by killing all of humanity. She is an eco-fascist, on a scale that makes Ra's al Ghul look like a pacifist. She tangled with Batman several times in this continuity, but did have moments of compassion and humanity, most notably in the No Man's Land story arc, when Gotham was destroyed in an earthquake, and she took over Robinson Park and even took in 16 orphans, feeding and keeping them safe and treating them like her own children. She delights in killing, often feeding her victims to her man-eating plants, but if she could be convinced to be a little more focused and less homicidal, she could be one of Earth's greatest heroes. She has been shown to be capable of creating tropical paradises in the middle of deserts. Just imagine the impact she could have on greenhouse gases if she started using this power to instantly replace clear-cut forests. In the New 52 reboot, she was brought a little closer to a hero as her motivations were changed so that she no longer wishes to destroy humanity for her plants, but wants to take out the massive polluters to make the Earth better for everyone, humanity included. Her methods are still a bit too extreme for her to be considered a superhero, but hey, progress is progress. Number 4. Purple Man. Zebediah Kilgrave was a Soviet spy tasked with stealing an experimental nerve gas from the Americans. While attempting this, a guard opened fire on Kilgrave, accidentally hitting the vial of nerve gas. It turned Zebediah purple and gave him the ability to manipulate the wills of others using his pheromones. Zebediah has used this power for truly horrifying purposes. The Purple Man is beyond redemption at this point, but the ability to make people do whatever you tell them can be used for good, just as easily as it can be used for evil. We got a taste of how Purple Man could be using his powers for good in the Jessica Jones television series, but a more consistent example of this power being used for non-sociopathic purposes is his daughter Kara. Kara has the same powers as her father, but rather than be a villain, she instead became the superhero Purple Girl. She was a longtime member of Alpha Flight before eventually joining the Thunderbolts and adopting the new alias Persuasion. Further proof that I can tie any video to Alpha Flight. Number 3. Dr. Octopus. One of Spider-Man's oldest foes, first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 3. Dr. Otto Octavius was a gifted scientist before the 4 mechanical arms he created to help with his experiments were fused to his body, driving him insane and into a life of crime. Doc Ock actually did become a superhero when he swapped bodies with Peter Parker and chose to become the superior Spider-Man. Although still a temperamental egomaniac, Octavius was able to do a lot of good as the new webbed wall crawler, eventually even sacrificing his life so that Peter could regain control of the body and save the day from the Goblin King. Otto soon returned to life, but unfortunately returned to a life of villainy soon after. It must be frustrating for Spider-Man to fight his old foe now that he knows for a fact that Otto could be and was an amazing superhero for a time. Number 2. Lex Luthor. Superman's greatest foe is a billionaire industrial genius who consistently comes up with evil schemes to feed his ego under the guise of helping humanity. Like Elon Musk if he actually knew how to invent stuff. Lex has battled the heroes of the Justice League for years, but eventually ended up saving the Earth from the crime syndicate. This shifted public opinion on the supervillain, and deciding that he liked the attention, Luthor became a hero and even managed to force his way onto the Justice League. When Superman died in the events of DC Rebirth, Luthor decided to take over the mantle, showing up in Superman's cape and in a supersuit with the House of L symbol on its chest. Despite the objections of the pre-Flashpoint Superman, who had been transported to this new reality, it's a long story. Lex operated as a Superman for a while before his resentment of his fellow heroes' mistrust led him to return to evil. It's interesting to know that the only thing preventing Lex from saving the Earth is his own narcissism and ego, and I'm sure it actually makes his evil schemes even more frustrating for the Man of Steel to put up with. Number 1. Clayface. If there's one thing I hate about DC Comics, it's having to keep track of all the different continuities and origins that are constantly changing every few years. Let's go with Clayface's post-Flashpoint origin for the purposes of this list. Basil Karlo was a successful and talented actor who was disfigured in a car accident just as his film career was really starting to take off. He began using a chemical putty called Renew, which allowed him to reshape his face in order to try and preserve his career. When his supply ran out, he attempted to steal it from the Gotham chemical plant and ended up being doused in the dangerous chemical. This transformed him into the villain Clayface. Clayface is able to shapeshift in order to impersonate anyone he wants, as well as take the form of anything he wants, transforming his arms into dangerous weapons or suffocating his enemies by taking on a dense mud-like form. He was one of Batman's most dangerous villains for years, but the Dark Knight was able to see his potential for good. He offered him a spot on the Gotham Knights, and Clayface was able to make the transition from supervillain to superhero. Unlike other villains who have dabbled in good deeds but have ultimately returned to evil, Clayface actually seems to prefer being a good guy. Not only has he developed lasting friendships with his teammates, but he has also managed to convince other villains to try and redeem themselves when he was able to get the villains Firefly, Knockout, Cheshire, and Killer Croc to help him take out the evil Peacekeeper drones in the Fear State story arc. Villains have an unfortunate habit of returning to evil, but let's hope Clayface is able to resist the temptation and remains one of Gotham's most unlikely heroes. Number 10. The Pied Piper. Hartley Rathaway was born deaf, but had his hearing medically restored and developed a love for music. He learned how to hypnotize others with music to force them to do what he wanted, and he became the supervillain the Pied Piper. He was sent to a mental hospital, and unlike everyone who goes to Arkham, it actually worked, and Hartley began using his abilities for good, making sure that the city's homeless were fed and sheltered. He became good friends with Wally West's Flash, and has even helped Flash take out a few villains over the years, such such as the Turtle and Mirror Master. Number 9. Two-Face. Harvey Dent was once one of Batman's staunchest allies, working with him as Gotham's district attorney in their effort to root out the crime and corruption that had plagued the city. This all changed when Dent was talking to the crime boss Salvatore Maroni in court. Maroni had smuggled in a vial of highly corrosive acid into the courtroom and threw it in Harvey's face, disfiguring half of his face and turning the heroic district attorney into the villainous Two-Face. Two-Face is obsessed with duality and flips a coin to determine whether or not he will kill his enemies. Two-Face is one of Batman's worst enemies, but when the villain Hush gave him plastic surgery, he switched back to the side of law and order and betrayed Hush, helping Batman and Jim Gordon defeat the villain. Batman's friend was back. He trained Harvey to become a vigilante and left him in charge of protecting Gotham while he was away during the Lost Year arc. Unfortunately, when Batman returned, he came across a series of killings that were designed to make it appear that Harvey had returned to villainy. Batman confronted Harvey, who was so angered at Batman's distrust that his Two-Face persona re-emerged and convinced Dent to re-scar his face and return to a life of crime. Number 8. Absorbing Man. Carl Creel was a former boxer turned criminal who was in prison when the trickster god Loki gave him the power to absorb the properties of whatever he touched, making him a powerful villain known as the Absorbing Man. Over the years, Creel went up against a host of heroes, including Thor, Spider-Man, Daredevil, and the Hulk, but he always ended up back in jail. When the government decided to go after the Hulk, they gave Creel boosted powers and sent him to take out Hulk. For reasons that are too complex to get into here, Creel was taken over by the One Below All and sent to Hell until he was rescued by the newly formed Gamma Flight, an organization dedicated to subduing dangerous gamma mutates. They offered Creel a spot on the team and a full pardon, and the Absorbing Man became a fully sanctioned hero, dedicated to helping people rather than hurting them. Number 7. Dr. Octopus. One of Spider-Man's oldest foes, first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 3, Dr. Otto Octavius was a gifted scientist before the 4 mechanical arms he created to help with his experiments were fused to his body, driving him insane and into a life of crime. Doc Ock actually did eventually become a superhero, when he swapped bodies with Peter Parker and chose to become the superior Spider-Man. Although still a temperamental egomaniac, Octavius was able to do a lot of good as the new webbed wall crawler, eventually even sacrificing his life so that Peter could regain control of the body and save the day from the Goblin King. Otto soon returned to life, but unfortunately returned to a life of villainy soon after. It must be frustrating for Spider-Man to fight his old foe now that he knows for a fact that Otto could be and was an amazing superhero for a time. Number 6. Sandman. William Baker was raised in less than ideal circumstances, with a father who abandoned him as a baby and a mother who coped with this by drinking too much. He grew up to be a bully, calling himself Flint and picking on those weaker and smaller than him. After being expelled from high school for throwing a football game, Flint turned to crime to support himself. He was eventually arrested but broke out of prison and was exposed to radiation that gave him the power to turn his body into sand that he could reshape into whatever shape he liked. He used these powers to fight heroes such as Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four for years, but eventually expressed a desire to go straight. He developed a friendship with the Thing and even rescued his old nemesis Spider-Man from the evil enforcers. He would go on to join Silver Sable's Wild Pack and was eventually allowed to join the Avengers, showing that he really did have it in him to be a hero. Unfortunately, a villain known as the Wizard created a machine that undid all of Flint's hard work and returned him to his evil nature. Number 5. MODOK Superior. MODOK Superior is the cloned brain of the original MODOK in a new robot body. Like the original MODOK, this version wanted to do as much evil as possible. However, he eventually made a deal with S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to help them uncover a traitor in exchange for amnesty. He planned on betraying Maria Hill, but realized that he'd fallen in love with her. This caused MODOK Superior to have a change of heart, and he became a rather unconventional hero, helping the Secret Avengers and forming his own hero team, mercenary organization dedicated only to killing. He also programmed himself for love, and created a more attractive version of himself called Brodok, bio-robotic organism designed overwhelmingly for kissing. But his inability to handle rejection from women soon led him back down the path of villainy. Number 4. The Green Goblin. Norman Osborn is perhaps the most awful villain in Spider-Man's rogues gallery. He has spent years trapped in a cycle of hatred and violence with Peter Parker, and is responsible for some of the worst moments in Peter's life, such as the death of one of Peter's great loves, Gwen Stacy. Which is why the idea of the Green Goblin becoming a superhero seems so strange. And yet, it happened. When the Sin Eater took away Norman's sins, Osborn was reformed. He wanted to make up for the evil that he had spent years doing, and he ditched the Green Goblin persona and got a new suit in name, calling himself Gold Goblin, and teaming up with Spider-Man to help keep the city safe. I doubt that Marvel will let Norman be a hero forever, so it's probably only a matter of time before Norman goes off the deep end again, but for now, it's interesting to watch him try and be a hero. Number 3. Clayface. Basil Carlo was a successful and talented actor who was disfigured in a car accident just as his film career was really starting to take off. He began using a chemical putty called Renew, which allowed him to reshape his face in order to try and preserve his career. When his supply ran out, he attempted to steal it from the Gotham chemical plant and ended up being doused in the dangerous chemical. This transformed him into the villain Clayface. Clayface is able to shapeshift in order to impersonate anyone he wants, as well as take the form of anything he wants, transforming his arms into dangerous weapons or suffocating his enemies by taking on a dense mud-like form. He was one of Batman's most dangerous villains for years, but the Dark Knight was able to see his potential for good. He offered him a spot on the Gotham Knights, and Clayface was able to make the transition from supervillain to superhero. Unlike other villains who have dabbled in good deeds but have ultimately returned to evil, Clayface actually seems to prefer being a good guy. Not only has he developed friendships with his teammates, but he also managed to convince other villains to try and redeem themselves when he was able to get the villains Firefly, Knockout, Cheshire, and Killer Croc to help him take out the evil Peacekeeper drones in the Fear State story arc. Villains have an unfortunate habit of returning to evil, but let's hope Clayface is able to resist the temptation and remains one of Gotham's most unlikely heroes. Number 2. The Riddler. When Edward Nygma was a child, he quickly showed that he had a gifted and powerful mind. His father was unable to come to terms with his son's brilliance and would hurt Edward, claiming that Edward's academic achievements were a result of him cheating. This caused Edward to develop a compulsive need to prove his intelligence, which resulted in him becoming the Riddler, a supervillain with the uncontrollable urge to leave riddles at the scenes of his crimes. This tendency to leave clues usually led to him getting caught by Batman. He eventually overcame this compulsion and reformed, becoming an accomplished private detective in Gotham City. He still has a massive ego, but he has helped Batman solve several murders over the years and has even saved a few lives, including the intended victim of a copycat villain called Conundrum and Dick Grayson. Considering how much he has accomplished as a good guy, it makes me wonder what he could have been capable of had he been raised in a more nurturing environment and had put his genius mind towards good sooner in his life. Unfortunately, all of this character development was undone in the New 52 reboot of the DC Universe, and the Riddler is once again an unrepentant supervillain. Number 1. Lex Luthor. Superman's greatest foe is a billionaire industrial genius who constantly comes up with evil schemes to feed his own ego under the guise of helping humanity. Like Elon Musk if he actually knew how to invent anything. Lex has battled the heroes of the Justice League for years, but eventually ended up saving the Earth from the crime syndicate. This shifted public opinion on the supervillain, and deciding that he liked the attention, Luthor became a hero and even managed to force his way onto the Justice League. When Superman died in the events of DC Rebirth, Luthor decided to take over the mantle, showing up in Superman's cape and a supersuit with the House of El symbol on its chest. Despite the objection of the pre-Flashpoint Superman, who had been transported to this new reality, Lex operated as a Superman for a while before his resentment of his fellow heroes' mistrust led him to return to evil. It's interesting to know that the only thing preventing Lex from saving the Earth is his own narcissism and ego, and I'm sure it actually makes his evil schemes even more frustrating for the Man of Steel to put up with.
Starting off our list with the biggest anti-hero on our list, in at number 10, Catwoman. Catwoman is a character who has lived a life of moral ambiguity. She first appeared in Batman issue 1 in 1940 as a villain who managed to swoon the Caped Crusader. Her criminal efforts were foiled, yet she evaded arrest thanks to successfully seducing Bruce. She was deemed inappropriate by the Comics Code Authority in the 50s though, and pretty much disappeared until she was reintroduced in the 1966 Adam West Batman television series. Despite thievery being one of her favorite pastimes, she has a big heart, and on numerous occasions has protected the innocent or sacrificed herself for a greater purpose. For example, in Batman Year 1, we see her do exactly that for her friend Holly, pleading guilty to murders that she didn't commit to help Holly out, who for the record murdered a bunch of terrorists, so it's not that bad. In the Batman the Animated Series, her very first appearance was a two-parter episode where she ended up taking down a terrorist organization who was using a mountain-lying sanctuary as a front to unleash a plague on Gotham. She actively protects the East End in Volume 3 of her comic, she's rescued Batman from the likes of Scarecrow and Bane in the past, and don't even even get us started on her heroic endeavors when it comes to animal rights. Up next at 9, Venom. Venom started off as a villain, one who first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 252 in 1984. He was an alien costume that would bond with Peter Parker and attempt to permanently stay that way. If it weren't for Reed Richards helping Spidey out, he very well could have become Venom himself. But after the two were separated, Venom found his way to Eddie Brock, becoming an enemy of Spider-Man since both he and Brock carried a grudge against the web-slinger. These days though, Brock and Venom have become anti-heroes for the most part. In 1993 we got to see him really flex his heroic muscles in Lethal Protector, where, after striking up a deal with Spider-Man, Spidey would leave him alone as long as he didn't commit any more crimes, Venom ended up aiding people rather than harming them, with the story arc leading to him putting a stop to his offspring. It's the story arc that depicted his progression from villain to anti-hero. Then in 1997's License to Kill, he got his criminal record erased in exchange for working as a government agent. And Venom was also a huge help when it came to Spider Island in 2011. Up next at 8, Condiment King. The Condiment King is the anomaly on our list today. He is a character who lands a spot on here simply because he would make for one hell of a hilarious superhero. I mean, he already makes for a humorous villain, but let's be honest. If you saw a guy running around with a gun full of condiments that he was firing at criminals, you'd probably not only get a good laugh from it, but it might actually help with deterring crime. I mean, I highly doubt anyone else wants to end up with mustard in their eyes. Is it worth robbing that bank if I'm gonna smell like ketchup for days? Condiment King first appeared in the Batman the Animated Series, created by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, in an episode called Make 'Em Laugh. He was a throwback to the 60s Adam West Batman show, and even used condiment-based puns like, "I knew you'd catch up to me sooner or later. How I relish this meeting." Gotta admit, watching Batman or Superman have to put up with this guy as a fellow ally would be funny as hell. And at 7, Galactus. Galactus is a character who is not inherently evil. He is a force of nature, a cosmic entity older than the entire universe, birthed from the universe that came before it. He is integral to the balance of said universe, and while at times, especially in his earlier appearances, he appears as a nefarious entity, really, he's just trying to satiate his hunger by devouring whole planets. Dude's gotta eat. Galactus already operates without regard to the morality and judgments of mortal beings. The Devourer of Worlds would have consumed Earth if it wasn't for the Watcher throwing the Fantastic Four a bone with the Ultimate Nullifier, a device that has been described as the universe's most devastating weapon that can completely eliminate any target the wielder chooses, and even the wielder themselves if they aren't focused enough. It freaked Galactus out and he moved on to devour another planet instead. All in all, he's not out to just get revenge or do something selfish. Like I said, he's just trying to eat. In at 6, Lex Luthor. As Superman's arch-nemesis, Lex Luthor has always believed that the Man of Steel posed a greater threat to humanity than giving it an advantage. But because of this, he's proven at times that he has Earth's best interests at heart. Lex has proven himself when it came to shaping society for the better. He once helped rebuild Gotham after the Cataclysm story event that left it in shambles thanks to an earthquake, along with the story arc that happened a year later in 1999 where the government had abandoned Gotham entirely, quarantining it. He came through and helped in a big way, using his resources at LexCorp to do so. Another time he saved Metropolis and arguably the world in Superman Last Son, when the Man of Steel was incapacitated during an invasion by villains from the Phantom Zone. Lex also found a cure for the Amazovirus in Forever Evil. In alternate realities, he's proven to be a great leader, like in Superman Red Son, where he became the president of the USA. All in all, he has a lot of potential, and he's come a long way since his early days in the comics, where he was merely depicted as a mad scientist. And at 5, Hela. This number is specifically looking at Hela from the MCU. As we learn in Thor Ragnarok, Hela was taught by Odin to conquer others. Nurture is everything, my friends, so when Odin changed his mind, rather than rehabilitating Hela from all of the conditioning that he put her through, he decides to imprison her for a few thousand years. So naturally, when she breaks out, she does the only thing she knows how. She tries to conquer Asgard and reclaim it by force. She doesn't know any better, so arguably under different circumstances, Hela could have been deemed a hero. And hey, maybe if Cate Blanchett comes back to the MCU, we might even see a more heroic version of the character. Now that Asgard's kinda kaputs. In at 4, Poison Ivy. Ivy is yet another example of a villain who has dabbled more and more in the anti-hero category in recent years. She is a DC baddie who calls herself an eco-terrorist of global importance, makes philanthropic contributions to conservation and environmental efforts, and in Gotham City Sirens, it was revealed that she donated $30 million to a reforestation fund. At the end of the day, she is a villain with a point, a character who isn't attempting to pull off evil schemes out of a selfish means, but rather is trying to save the thing she loves most. Nature. In the New 52, she was a member of the Birds of Prey, where, despite resorting to some brutal tactics every now and then, she fought for the greater good, and even began to break out of that stone-cold personality that she's been typecasted into in previous years. Sometimes she even exhibits empathy, and actually cares about the lives of innocent people and children. And despite their on and off again romantic status, she's also shown Harley Quinn a whole lot of affection, proving that she is capable of love. Poison Ivy is on the side of life, which is often plant life, but is still life regardless. Even when she's used her powers to mind control the entire human race in Tom King's run on Batman in issue 41, her intentions were arguably pure, and one could debate that her influence is the only way the planet will stay alive. And at number 3, Thanos. After Avengers Infinity War came out, many a fan argued that Thanos was the protagonist of the film. The narrative it weaved was one that focused on his motivations, gave audiences a glimpse into his psyche. The MCU version of Thanos legitimately believes that he is doing the right thing for the universe, for the greater good, by wiping out half of all living things. Ugh. The universe is growing faster than it can maintain itself and depleting its resources at a rate that is unsustainable, something that he caught on to and wanted to change. He saw it happen on his home planet, so he concocted an initial plan. He would travel around the universe, conquer planets, and then wipe out half of each civilization randomly. It's taken quite a while, until he got his hands on the Infinity Stones and that gauntlet. While he does have a point, his methods are definitely twisted and too extreme. Imagine if he had channeled all that energy and his efforts into a plan that actually helped life flourish. While that's the case with the MCU, we can't really say the same about the comic version of the character. In Infinity Gauntlet and the lead up to it when Thanos collected all the Infinity Gems, the Mad Titan was motivated by his unrequited love for the entity Death. Death had manipulated him, and he wanted to show his love for her and his worth by eliminating half of all living beings in the entire universe. That is what prompts our heroes, guided by Adam Warlock, to take him on. Sure, he does help solve the problem when Nebula gets the gauntlet afterwards, but still, it's kind of because Adam Warlock guilts him into doing it. Up next at 2, Magneto. Magneto believes that the mutant race is the evolutionary superior race to humans, and rejects the possibility that mutants and humans could ever coexist peacefully. He is a Holocaust survivor, someone who witnessed the extermination of a race, and therefore grew up to be cynical, determined to protect mutants from suffering a similar fate in a world that strives to persecute them. He experienced the worst of humanity and has devoted his life to preventing that from occurring again. That actually sounds kind of heroic. Sure, he needs to kill some humans to do that, but consider his childhood. During World War II, he witnessed Nazis kill his family and thousands of others. The number of casualties on both the Allies and the Axis sides during the war are intangible numbers to us these days. Can't even imagine slaughter on that level. But for Eric, it's all too real. Killing and fighting has always been involved in the equation when it comes to making a change. Now that's not to say we condone his methods. He's still pretty radical to an extent, and lacks the morality of his counterpart Charles Xavier. But let's be blatantly honest, Magneto has been proven right about humanity multiple times. And he connects with readers and audiences on a very human level. It's easy to understand his motivations, even though his actions have had devastating consequences in the past. And last but not least, in at number 1, Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom is yet another villain with a point on our list. Sure, he might be a narcissistic tyrant who believes that he is the best person for the job when it comes to being the supreme ruler of the earth, but we gotta admit, it's not entirely a long shot as far as he's concerned. We've seen the character in various alternate realities over the years where taking over the earth has actually led to a successful yet mildly restrictive timeline. In Doom 2099, we see him do exactly that in an alternate future. Back in the 616 universe, Latveria doesn't have poverty or disease because of him. Sure, he is basically running a dictatorship there, but it is peaceful as hell, and he genuinely cares about his countrymen and women. He once fought Mephisto for his mom's soul, and he worked with Doctor Strange to save all of the multiverse when Molecule Man Owen Reese became a threat to it thanks to the Beyonders. Plus, he legit became a superhero once, becoming the infamous Iron Man after Tony Stark had died in Civil War II. He assumed the mantle to protect the planet, but despite trying to turn a cheek and become good, many didn't believe him that he was seeking redemption from his supervillain past. He even took on Hydra. Eventually though, Tony was resurrected and Doom receded into madness after seeing that no one actually appreciated his good deeds, nor took him seriously as a hero. So really, Marvel Universe.